So good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Community Connect for July. Great to see all of you here. And for those that are new and are joining us today, this is a monthly session that we hold. And it's an opportunity where I will typically sit down with a leader who's doing real transformation or working in programs. And we have a conversation about what's actually happening and what's been working and what's not been working. So the theme for this month, and something that I want to start with, is a lot about how we kick off as we get into this new financial year and the quarter. So it's July the 3rd already, so we're already a couple of days into the new year. And for some of you here, you'll be considering new budgets, new mandates, new programs, new teams, and lots of newness. So there's a window right now, and I think it's in this window, these first few weeks, where it's the decisions you make that will shape everything that follows. Now, most people don't treat this time like a window. It's just, let's get started, let's get into it, we're moving fast. And then it's often where you get to December and it's reflection time. We start to consider, why haven't things been successful? So the value that's going to lie in today's conversation is all around the setup. And we'll talk about the problems with setup, but also what makes a successful setup. And I'm really fortunate to have a very special guest today. In the time I've known her, I've seen how she thinks about the way of setting things up and the value that comes from it. In the time that I've worked with Tanya, the conversations I've enjoyed the most are not those that are focused on frameworks or templates or tools. They're the ones that are outcomes and people focused. So Tanya Graham joins us as a former group executive for digital and transformation at ICARE, New South Wales. Hope I've got that right, Tanya.
Yeah.
But we also go back a long way before that, where Tanya was head of transformation at Alinta Energy, and I supported her with the capability uplift there. So she's led large, complex programs, and she's worked across government and utilities. And I have to say, she's someone who's very deliberate about how she sets things up for success from the start. So Tanya, welcome. Really glad that you're here.
Thanks, Marcus. Great to be here. Happy Friday, everyone.
So we'll jump straight into it. And I think if we start with the problem, which it's more common than most people tend to admit, it's in that startup piece. So Tanya, from your experience, when you look at the programs that struggle, those ones that are 6 months in and everyone's asking how it went sideways, or the watermelon that shifted from green to red, what are the things that were missing right at the start, or the setup decisions that weren't made or weren't made well?
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, isn't it? And like you say, we're in a really interesting time of the year at the moment, because we're often setting off new portfolios of strategic initiatives. It's the start of a new financial year, so there's new budgets. People have new objectives for the year, so there's a bit of activity and excitement. So this is kind of the prime opportunity to try and make sure that everything's set up well. I might start at a high level, and then I'm sure as we get more into the conversation, and I'm interested to hear other people's views and experiences as well, we'll probably get into more of the specifics. But I think what's often missing isn't necessarily on the project plan. Like like you were saying before, I take the project plan, the frameworks and everything as almost a bit of a given. They're sort of the hygiene things that happen most of the time anyway. It's more about the conditions that determine whether the plan can actually be delivered. And I think that's where I'm sure we'll probably focus our conversation, but I think that's what can make or break the success of a program or a portfolio of initiatives. So at a high level, I think it's around strategic context. So making sure there's real clarity about why the program matters in the first place and what are the outcomes that are going to be delivered. I think it's really important to make sure that you've got the right sponsorship and ownership, And I've got lots of stories about where that has worked well and where it hasn't worked well. Alignment is the other piece. So how do you make sure that you've got everyone moving in the same direction when you do have that flurry of excitement and activity? And then, as you said, Marcus, one of my big areas of focus is around the people. So the key thing about the setup piece that's often missed or glossed over quite quickly is how do you make sure you get the right people in the right roles? And how do you get that real true connection across the team? So it's really around kind of clarity, alignment, and getting some early momentum, I think, at a very high level. And then obviously we can sort of drive down into a bit more specifics as well.
It's funny as you're talking, Tanya, I'm seeing smiles across the call and a lot of
Yeah,
nodding
I'm
heads.
sure. Smiles and nods.
You've probably touched on a couple of key points for people there, and I think what I can hear is it's those deliberate choices that are made up front. I think there's a lot of value in that conversation, and for people that are here today, I think we've all seen our share of good sponsors, not so good sponsors. So, for you, what does good active sponsorship actually look like in those first few weeks?
Yeah, I think a really, really good sponsor is someone who is truly vested in the program. And sadly, I mean, often you get sponsors who are taking on a program, but they're only sort of half interested in it. They've got 10 other priorities. This is one of many. And so they sort of pay a bit of lip service to it and just expect everyone else to do everything. I think, you know, for me personally, when I'm a sponsor, I want to make sure that I've sat down with the team. We've got a really clear understanding around the roles that we're each playing. I like to have an opportunity to talk about how I want to operate as a sponsor. I'm quite a hands-on sponsor, so I want to be involved in, you know, the kickoff sessions, not necessarily in the detail, but to help to set the direction and the vision, and inspire people and get them excited about why we're doing this piece of work. And then also have a regular touch point throughout, because I think the sponsor is the real kind of needs to be the visible person, not necessarily the face of the program, but I think you need to be out there front and center and championing the changes that you're driving. And one of the things I found works quite well, and actually, Marcus, I'm not sure if this is something that you and I came up with 10 years ago, but in one of your prior roles, but is a sponsor roadmap. So actually looking at the sort of the project life cycle and timeline and going, right, what are the key moments that matter across that time frame, and how do we want to use our sponsor, our business owners, the other key people across the program, to really sort of communicate or advocate for whatever it is that we're changing and doing. And so being quite proactive and thinking forward, I think is really important. So and that then comes back to that notion that I mentioned before, which is around availability and accessibility. I think if you're not available or accessible as a sponsor, that's a real problem. So you need to make sure that you're carving out the time and it's seen as a key part of your deliverables and outcomes and objectives for that period of time that you're involved.
Isn't it funny how you do things and you completely forget them until somebody reminds you? So I'm reliving the sponsor roadmap now. Actually, yeah, that was a great point in time. Thank you for that. I think something else that you said there, you talked a lot about experience being important, and I often find it's you've got that balance, right? So yes, there's accountability, but there's capability as well, and that was a big topic in the last quarter for us that we were talking about. Um, you've got to where you are because of the experiences that you've had, and you know, some of them have been good and some of them have not been so good, but the honest challenge that you've described is that you've got to where you are because you've lived it and because you've experienced it. So you've made the calls, you've seen what happened, you've had to adjust. But for somebody who's earlier in their career, you talked about that program lead before, or maybe it's a change manager that's starting to step into a more senior role. how do they fast track that? You know, then you've got the person who's worked on the $1 million project and suddenly they start dealing with the $10 million program. How do they build the judgment without cracking the eggs first? Because we've learned what we have because we've seen the other side of it. But for somebody else, what could they put in place?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's hard because, I mean, ultimately it takes time and you can't necessarily accelerate the building of all of those years of experience and do it quicker. But I think what you can do is learn to ask the right questions and know when to push back and when to challenge on something that doesn't look or feel right. Some suggestions on how to do this. I think having an external mentor or a person on the side that you can use to guide you and to challenge your thinking. I think if you can ask someone who's run major programs to, you know, take a look at your program at the start and tell you what they'd be worried about and where they'd be asking questions, it will help to surface any sort of blind spots that you can't see or that you're not experienced enough to spot. So I think that's definitely really, really helpful. And you can almost see that if you also look at the difference between, you know, good program leads and not so good program leads and the way that they look at those kind of things. I think you can put in some structures to help you. So using like a setup checklist, but not using it as a checklist as a tick box exercise, but use it as a conversation starter. So, you know, do you actually have an accountable executive or just someone who's been nominated? You know, how vested are they in this program? Is that something you should challenge at the beginning? Are you just accepting someone saying I'll be involved when I need to be? Or, you know, that's not going to work very effectively. So I think having, you know, that checklist in your back pocket that you can use to prompt conversations is helpful. I think if you can learn to distinguish between visible progress and real progress, this is something like, to your point, Marcus, about the good old watermelon. In the program that I was talking about, the technical delivery was tracking well for the first 6 months. So on the surface, everything looked great. But underneath, the governance conditions were deteriorating and the people side of it was deteriorating. So I think when you're less experienced, you tend to trust the project plan more than you trust your observations. And I think we need to flip it the other way so that if you're seeing something that doesn't quite match what you're being told, you've got the courage to call it out. And I think one of the other things that's quite useful to do, and something that I've done, is almost have an early warning. Again, you could either have a checklist or just a journal. So you sort of set yourself your own discipline that at the ends of, you know, the first week, the second week, the first month, you're asking yourself, is there anything that I'm uncertain about that I haven't raised that I need to raise in like a steerco or a program meeting? Or anything where you feel like maybe you're accepting something that's normal and maybe it's not normal. So I think those are the things that maybe might help to accelerate through that sort of building of experience.
And going back a step or so, you talked about that accountability piece from the sponsorship early on. Is there anything that you've done before that you used to really test that?
In terms of testing the accountability of the sponsors,
and the capability, yeah, of the sponsor.
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably not specifically in terms of testing capability. I think you get it. It's a gut feel. It's around the sort of personality and the general leadership style, probably, of the sponsor, and the way that they lead as a leader. So I think if I think about you know, myself as a leader and how the environment that I want to create, and the environment that I want to create as a sponsor, a lot of it is around being genuine, being open and transparent, creating an environment that's psychologically safe so that people can raise concerns, feedback, etc. You know, for me as a leader, I'm someone who shares as much information as I possibly can with my team at any point in time, apart from stuff that's highly sensitive or confidential, so that I am seen as someone who is transparent and approachable and accessible, and also building a bit of a culture of feedback as well. So I'm always asking for feedback, whether it's at the end of, you know, a town hall or a project kickoff or through engagement surveys, and then making sure that I either act on that feedback or genuinely explain to people why I'm not acting on it or I can't act on it, so they understand why not. So I think that those kind of capabilities, they're general leadership capabilities, but they're also really, really relevant for being a good sponsor, I think, on a program and helping to set that program up for success.
I love some of those points, and I can really reflect back, and I remember times where I've seen you display them. I think if I was going to point to anything there, my test often of that engagement is the importance. How important is this? And whenever we worked together, I got the sense that it was important. And little indicators show importance. You were always on time for the meeting. You were available when we had a query. You spoke about the importance of the why and the what of the initiative. And when we came up against a blocker, you made it important to try and unblock that thing for us. So I always thought about the importance test. And I also saw the counter of that in other places as well. You know, we've probably all dealt with, okay, well, I've been there for a meeting and the person hasn't shown up, right? Maybe there's a legitimate reason, but if it becomes a pattern, how important is this to them? Or if the issues are there, but they're not resolved, how important is this to them? And I think that the importance factor and our time working together, you always showed me how important the initiative was to you.
Yeah, I think that's really, really key, because that's what energizes a team then to gel and work together. It just creates that sort of almost a bit of a cliche, but, you know, a high performing team environment essentially.
So just if we get into a little bit more detail, and I was having a conversation earlier this week, organization, they're getting into the rhythm of transformation in their program. They believe they've started. They feel like they've done the kickoff. Think things are okay. Something's not quite right. It's feeling off. For you, what are the early signals that that organization should be paying attention to? What do you think are the things that, with your experience, you now know how to act on quickly?
Yeah, I think again, like I think I said at the beginning, that it's around the conditions in the setup rather than the sort of the plan itself. We've talked obviously about the sponsorship side of things and making sure that's fully engaged and not leaving a vacuum there. I think the other thing is, from a people perspective, that psychological safety, and really kind of keeping an eye out for that to make sure that I think you can sense it. You can see it and sense it within a team pretty quickly, whether it's there or not. So I think in the early stages, kind of watch for the program leaders who brief up well, but are not briefing kind of across, and watch how they're communicating when things become uncertain or ambiguous. What's their behaviour when they're under pressure? Are they sharing information or controlling information? Do they bring people together or keep them separate? I think there's some really interesting behavioural aspects that you can pick up on quite early.
I hope I'm not disclosing too much here, but the framework that you've worked with for a long time, and the one that I've enjoyed most, you've always talked about that idea of strength and warmth. And I remember some very warm moments when we were transforming Westfield and sitting there having hot chocolates or espressos, and strength during some of the harder times, that you had to navigate at Alinta. And then
Yeah.
that concept of strength and warmth, I think, has been brilliant on the way through. How do you hold both of those, particularly when things are hard or getting under pressure? How have you been able to do that?
Yeah, it's I love this concept of strength and warmth. For those that haven't encountered that before, strength is generally kind of seen as your competency and your ability as a leader. And so that's what means that people sort of trust that you're in that leadership role, you're there because you can do the job, and you give them confidence that you know what you're doing. And then the warmth is about being just a human being, essentially. We're all the same. We're all humans. We all have similar challenges at work. We all have similar challenges at home. And how do you share that? So you sort of help the hierarchy to melt away a little bit. And that balance of strength and warmth and how that helps you to build and connect a strong team. So I think it's a really important concept to always have in the back of your mind. And it's interesting when you think some people are stronger on the strength, they'll come across much more competent and they'll be less warm, and other people will be more warm, which is they're a great human, but they might be lacking in some of their skills, which is then the strength and sort of competency piece. So how do you as an individual try and make sure you've got a good balance between the two?
I'm watching the studious people on the call writing down strength and warmth. They've probably already drawn a 4-box matrix and they've mapped most of their previous leaders against one of those axes, right? It's Donald Trump, where does he sit? Barack Obama, where does he sit? We can probably see our different leaders in versions of strength and warmth. So thank you for sharing that. And we're coming towards the close of our discussion, and I think it's been so valuable. I want to leave a little bit of time for questions because we've got a good audience that's with us today. But I think in closing, as we sit here, it's 3rd of July today. A lot of people will be in this time now where they're kicking something off because it's new financial year, or that's just the state of play. Maybe they've already kicked off and they're a few weeks in and you're in that setup window. Tanya, what would you say is the one thing you'd want them to really be honest with themselves about before too much time passes and they're in those reset situations that you talked about before?
I think the one question would be to ask yourself is, have you got the right conditions in place to be successful, which is all the things that we've talked about today. And then have you got a cadence in place to be able to sense check that as well? So like I said, this time of year, it's often a lot of activity, a lot of excitement. There's new money to be had. There's business cases getting approved. We all want to just get into the doing and do a good job and deliver those things. But how do you make sure that the exec team are really aligned on the organisational priorities, that you've got good support and backing? Do you have a good cadence in place so that, like every quarter, 90 days, you're reviewing the priorities, the progress, whether that's a quarterly strategy review or a business unit review or whatever you have in place at your organisations? Is there an opportunity to put in place something like shared scorecards so that you're all clear about the outcomes that need to be delivered and who's playing what role? And then how do you make sure that you've got that culture of openness and transparency so people feel that they can speak up for both the things that are going well, but the things that also need to be addressed? So I think the program set up or this time of year is an interesting time because it's often seen as a bit of a planning phase. But really, this time of year is about leadership, accountability, people. How do we make sure that we're setting things up on really solid ground?
I've got to say it because I've been taking notes and I think I'm summarising as you talk. But it's probably asking ourselves that question. how solid is your core, right? Because you talked about context. So context and clarity, have you got that up front? What does your sponsorship or your ownership look like? Is the ownership in place? You talked about what are your checkpoints, so your rhythms, are your rhythms there? And then the scorecards where you're measuring your engagement. And I think it's that maybe we should all be checking with ourselves, how solid is our core? And I really, there's so many great things that you've left us with there, Tanya, on the environment as well. So
I think there's one extra thing that I'd add as well is what are the assumptions that you're taking forward to? Because in my example that I was talking to, there were certain things that I think we thought at the beginning of the program were agreed, but they weren't. And so what do you genuinely need to resolve right now? What are the things that you're hoping will work themselves out that you're taking forward as assumptions? Because I think the things that you hope will resolve themselves rarely do, and those are the ones that become the expensive problems later on.
Yeah. And I think the other thing from that as well is we're always too busy working in the machine. And when do we actually step out to think about working on the machine as well? With the program and the setup, everybody just wants to get going. That's great, right? But you've highlighted, how do you create the space, or how do you create the time to think about how it's going to run and how it's going to run well? So that's been brilliant. Thank you. So I think this has been exactly the kind of conversation I hoped it would be. And I really appreciate what you've shared with us, Tanya. And I think hopefully it's been of value to the people that are here on the call. We've got a couple of minutes, so we've got an opportunity for Q&A. So I'll invite the audience if you want to open your mics and any questions that we've got for Tanya.
Marcus, can I jump in?
Go for it, Ellis. Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. My name's Ellis Richardson. I am a senior transformation leader. I've worked on IT projects, transformation programs, moved buildings. And Tanya, I had to actually go and look at your LinkedIn page to see if we worked in the same organisation, because I feel like you were talking about exactly where I worked in the past. I've had sponsors who was stretched across multiple programs of his own. So he was a sponsor of multiple programs. He wasn't engaged in one, he was engaged in multiple, but even then he was disengaged because he was also working on business as usual. As I was as a leader, I was program manager, project manager, and operationally responsible for IT. So all of those things start to play a part. And I guess from my perspective, a lot of the things you mentioned today is like, perfect way to consider a program of work is to use your experience from other programs and reverse engineer that back to try and set yourself up for success on the next one, and hope those lessons that you've learned from any post-implementation review or reviews that you do, or resets. And I think a lot of that is driven by the culture of the organisation that you're working in. And if you protect that culture first and foremost, then hopefully your program will always be successful, because the people aren't seeing the dangers of a program or a change. They're seeing the benefits of it. And I think if as program leaders or transformation leaders, that we're visible and accessible through that, as you said, the hallway conversations are so critical to the success, because it keeps people engaged, it keeps people safe. And I think that safety in a culture is big. But reverse engineering every program of work takes time, but I think it also helps set up that success piece and the setup piece. It's interesting because I started just going back through Prince 2 foundation work today, just to remind myself about Prince 2. And there's the seven themes through that, around, your business case, organization, quality plans, but it's really about the change and the risk of a poor culture. No matter how good your structure is of a program, if you've got a poor culture within you're not going to have that success, because a program of work can be 18 months, or it could be 2 years, or it could be 12 months. People want to jump straight to the end of that program, so they're already setting themselves, what's it going to look like? So we've got to keep them safe all the way along and protect that culture. I think that's a big piece. Anyway, that's my rant, but I took a lot of great value out of today to reaffirm, for the next time that I start a new program of work or a new transformation, that I'm reminded of the things to look out for. Thank you.
That's great. That's great feedback. And yeah, I mean, everybody on this session today has got a heap of experience already, and I think it's not necessarily that because we've got more years experience in transformation it makes us any smarter. It just means we've had more opportunities to learn what happens when you skip some of those things at the beginning or skip some of the hard conversations. So I guess it's, how do we all share those insights so everyone can learn?
I think there's a lot of pressure at the beginning of any program to get going, so it's often, you can often be under pressure to just shortcut things. So your decision making is not as clear-headed and clear-minded as it would be, say, 30, 60, 90 days down the track when you've got a bit of space. So again, those checkpoints that you're talking about at the end of week 1 or the end of month 1 are extremely important to be able to have that breathing space to come back and, be able to go back and reflect early on to make sure you haven't missed things, or to pick up the things that you might have left behind. Extremely important, and not be afraid to do so, not to be afraid to reset something either, to actually go, hey guys, we need to pause this before it gets too far gone, otherwise we're going to end up in that train wreck.
Yeah, and that was exactly what we had to do. We had to take 3 weeks out to unpick a few things and do a full reset. Yeah.
Thank you, Alice. And I think it's almost like you're paving the way for our August Community Connect with some of the ideas that you're coming up with there. That's great. And it's funny what you say about focusing on things at the start. Alice and I used to work for a program assurance advisory firm, and the one thing we always used to say was, we're getting pretty tired of looking at dead bodies. When can we help give birth to a baby? There's only so many post-implementation reviews that you can look at before you go, why can't we just invest in doing things right at the start rather than looking at it after the horse has bolted? Yeah. Right. Any other questions from the audience in the time that we've got?
Yeah, I've got one. Hi everyone, my name is Joe Braziz. So I started my career as a developer, and I've kind of moved up to a kind of product manager, business analyst. So what I'm finding is I'm getting these projects handed in my lap, and the main sponsor for these projects ends up leaving. So then I'm having to deal with previous assumptions and conversations that I wasn't a party to. So yeah, keen to get any advice there on how to tackle that scenario.
Yeah, and so are you picking them up as the sponsor or the business owner?
I'm picking them up as the person to get the job done.
Get the job done, yeah.
The responsibility hasn't officially been delegated to me. So then I become the de facto sponsor. So
right.
Yeah.
I think, it's really hard, right? Because particularly if there's a lengthy time frame for some of these things, some of the assumptions tend to change over time and then don't hold true anymore, etc. So I think the thing that I've found is that if you're picking something up, you need to get across the rationale for why it was being done in the first place. Does that still make sense? Do the assumptions still hold true? And if not, or you don't think the value's there anymore, then I think you need to have the conversation to either reset and make sure everyone's really clear about what is being delivered and why, or have the conversation to say, actually, this just doesn't make sense anymore. And maybe it's not something we should continue with. And actually, we need to, put people on something different that actually is the right direction now.
Probably have time for one more question. If anybody has a question they'd like to ask before we close.
I've got one quick one, if you want.
Go again, Joe.
Yeah.
So with AI coming into the picture, what I'm finding is the tech solutions are moving faster than what's defined in the scope and the governance and kind of the quality gates. So yeah, you end up what you initially planned is you're getting technically to that point faster. And yeah, you're always starting to play catch up. Yeah, any advice there in the changing AI landscape?
Are you finding that with AI in particular, or just in general across all technology?
Yeah, so in what I'm finding is in each part of the business, there's AI being injected in their workflows. So they're producing results quicker, but those results need to be triaged. And yeah, that's where you've got developers maybe going into a rabbit hole, and not really sticking to the scope of what's been defined in the plan.
Yeah, I guess it's challenging, isn't it, at the moment where you've got sort of new technology that everyone can play with. To your point about going down rabbit holes, one of the things that I've found more and more over the last couple of years is, certainly at an executive level, is moving away from kind of prolific project portfolios where you've got 100, 200 different projects and pet projects and things happening, to try and get really, really specific on 10 to 15, what are the critical 10 to 15 things that we need to deliver as a business, and getting really, really focused on those. It's a hard one though, because you don't want to stifle innovation and continuous improvement, but how do you give people real focus and clarity? Because at the moment there can be a lot of distractions around. And the whole sort of AI space is really kicking off at the moment in terms of, is it really delivering value? What are the use cases that are really working? The cost of AI with all the compute that gets consumed, etc. So there's a whole nother kind of discussion around all of that. I think probably it's just about how do you get that. I think there was a couple of things in your question. One was around that sort of speed and velocity being out of whack or out of sync, and then people kind of going off and doing things that might not necessarily be part of the set of priorities. So a really, really interesting one, because I think it does probably all come back to how do you get your sort of middle managers and leaders to set really clear direction, so that you don't have lots of busy work happening, but you've got people focused on the right things, so that you can try and get those delivery velocities in more of a sync. So we probably don't have enough time to go into it in great depth, but you raise a really good point there, Marcus. That could be another topic to dive into.
I was actually going to say, Joe, if you get a chance, check out the podcast and the YouTube from last month, because we talked all about the judgment economy and how we need to move from being a creator to a curator, making better decisions with technology. So that might be a helpful point for you. Now, just mindful of time, we'll bring things to a close. So thank you again, Tanya. Really appreciate you giving us the time. And for everyone that's joined us today, we'll follow up with you specifically with the short summary of the key themes that we've heard. So keep an eye out for that. And if this conversation has you thinking about your own program and your own setup, that's a great starting point. Feel free to reach out to Tanya directly, and we hope to see you again next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
See
everyone.
you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.